Welcome, everyone. We're going to get going here. Welcome to this session. I know it's lunchtime. I know some of you are going to be eating. So that's cool with us. You know, we're all right with that. But we appreciate you taking time out to come see us. My name is Mike Nelson, and I'm going to be co-presenting with a couple of folks here. We're going to be talking about security and threat detection in Azure. I am a field technologist with Rubrik, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP in Cloud and Data Center. And we have also on the stage with me the lovely Leah.
Can everybody hear me? Oh,
now you can.
There we go. Okay. My name is Leah Shobe, and I'm a master technologist at Rubrik. And both of us, Mike and myself, have been at Rubrik for a couple of months. So
short time.
We had to bring in an expert of Rubrik along. So we also have Ken Hui here, who will answer questions that we can't answer about Rubrik.
Right. And one of the things we are going to be doing, too, is we're going to be giving away a couple of these really cool limited edition T-shirts that were designed by our field, our tech marketing team. If anybody knows what that is, that's the old Galaga video game. Yeah, they're really cool. So we'll give a couple of those away when we do the Q&A. But let's jump right into this. Get my clicker here.
There you go.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to do is obviously ask a couple questions of the audience, just so I get a gauging of what you guys are doing, right? So a lot of you, how many actually have IaaS production in Azure? Anybody actually running production? I'm assuming some have dev tests, right? Okay, cool. How many of those actually follow the same security procedures that you do on site up into the cloud? 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's a lot fewer hands than was up when they said that they had IaaS in the cloud. Has anybody, and you don't have to state any names, and don't be shy, but has anybody been attacked yet up in the cloud, up in Azure or any cloud? Has anybody suffered an attack that they, are saying, yeah, I was brute forced or I was DDoSed or anything like that? Nobody wants to admit it? Oh, hey, one person admitted it. Awesome. And I would bet that number is a lot bigger. Just nobody wants to say anything. But what we're really here to talk about is we're talking about something that's a paradigm shift for folks. Now, you can't really, have the same basis of what you're used to in the data center as it is today. If you were at a data center as is today, you would be able to walk up to a physical rack, walk up to a physical server, and if you were under attack, you would be able to go like this and pull the network cable out and say, oh, no, we're good, right? Can you do that in the cloud? Yeah, you can do it virtually, but do you know it's actually disconnected? Number one, but number two, you could have multiple, VNets and subnets and everything else that you got to go and figure out. It's just out of your comfort zone, right? It's out of a lot of folks' comfort zone to be able to just not be able to physically touch that hardware, physically touch that infrastructure, and be able to stop whatever's going on. You can't just walk up to the Microsoft data center in Cheyenne, Wyoming, walk up to the front door and say, I want you to take, this server and this rack, where my VM is, and I want you to unplug that rack because I'm under attack. That's not how it works. So, question I have for you is, though, does your cloud security really look like this? Is it just a piece of barbed wire? Your on-premises security, okay? It's probably got a bunch of, if you're, even from an enterprise perspective, if you've got a bunch of compliance and auditing, and you have a bunch of rules and policies and all kinds of things that you have to put in place, right? But do you actually have the same thing in place up in the cloud? A great example of this is I had someone at another conference that happened in Las Vegas, which is a competitor to Microsoft, not too long ago. I was talking to them, and they actually suffered an attack. But the thing was that they were talking, and they said that they came to the realization that, you know what? The cloud provider, Microsoft in this case, doesn't take care of everything for me. And I was like, really? You really thought that they did? They don't. You still have to be involved. You still have to make, policies and things like that. You still have to conform to what your organization needs from a security footprint and a security blueprint, if you will, the new word here at Ignite, in order to be, safe, in order to be compliant. So, first of all, you have what I call the easy hits. Now, you guys should be able to tell me what these are. From any sysadministrator standpoint, what is the easiest hit, okay, that can happen to a VM in the cloud? The first thing that comes to your mind. Anybody? No? Well, close. Open ports. Right there. I don't know if you know this, but up until about, well, I don't know, 6-8 months ago, by default, RDP was open on any machine that you built in Azure, if it was a Windows machine. Okay? If you built a Linux box, 22 was open, right, for SSH. That's not true anymore. By default, they're closed now. Okay? Somebody got smart and said, hey, we got a lot of attacks going on. We probably shouldn't have these open by default. But that is one of the biggest hits. The second one, unpatched machines. I'm going to put a VM up in Azure. I'm going to create an IaaS structure up in Azure. Oh yeah, I forgot I got to patch it. Oh crap, yeah, that's right. I got to add it to my infrastructure patching schedule, maintenance windows, all that other kind of fun stuff. A lot of people forget about that. They forget about that. Not everything is taken care of for you when you put it up there. And then, of course, there's weak passwords. Obviously, when you create a VM in Azure, it requires a administrator password. It's not actually administrator, as many of you know. It's actually just a name that you give it. It might be a service account or whatever you use on premises. But that has to be like minimum, I think, of 12 characters and a whole bunch of other rules and things like that. But what happens is that the administrator, obviously, that box may not be for them. It's going to be for another group of people that he has to create users for, or if it's part of AAD, they have to be brought in. And of course, if you don't really apply the same rules, you can have users with weak passwords. So, some interesting info I'm going to pass along to you about this. And this comes directly from Microsoft's SIR, which I'll talk about in a second, and a cyber defense report from 2017. There's more than 2 million breach attempts per day in Azure. A little over 2 million. And that's as of volume 23 of the SIR. So if you can think about that, that's a lot. But when you think about the massive size of Azure, not so much. Highest percentage of encounters, as Microsoft Cyber Defense likes to call them, are botnets, crypto lockers, phishing, and ransomware. Those are the big ones. Now, of course, the big one was ransomware, right? Actually, that's kind of leveled off a little bit. And actually, crypto lockers are really coming in full force now. So, there's over 1,000 brute force attacks every second. And I would bet that number is kind of a variable, but I would guess it's pretty close. The Gamu botnet, Andromeda, if you haven't heard about that, I'm not going to read through these, but it's basically the worst one that came out. I mean, it spawned so many. If you're not familiar with the botnet, especially the Gamu one, it actually was a kit that you could create other botnets off of. And that's how they came up with this last one, which is ransomware as a service. So you can actually now go out and a company will provide you ransomware as a service. They'll take care of all the Bitcoin collection, all the ransom collection for you, and all that kind of fun stuff. Believe it or not, that is available. Kind of scary. So brute force attacks, like I said, 100,000 attacks a month on average. Ports are left open. It's really easy to do. I think that they actually do have a book called Brute Forcing for Dummies. You didn't know that? That's actually a book. And then, of course, the remedy is to lock it down. And I'll talk about JIT here in a little bit, and I'll show you in the demo. So this is really this is Microsoft's cyber reference architecture. This is all the things that they do. Now, there's no way that we're going to get through all that, okay? We're going to focus a lot on the VM aspect of it and the threat detection on the infrastructure as a service. So responsibility zones, these are really important. Who's actually responsible for the things that you put out in the cloud? When you're talking about on-premises, of course, everything is your responsibility, right? When you start getting into infrastructure as a service, a little bit of like 60-40, okay? Then you go into platform as a service, PaaS. Now you're going 70-20, or 80-20. I'm sorry, 70-20. That doesn't have to 100. 80-20, right? And then finally you get down to software as a service where it's all the responsibility of the provider. That also is a spectrum of control and trust, right? You start out from the left there, from on-premises, go all the way to the right to SaaS, right? You're talking about everything that has to happen from an outsourced trust all the way on the right-hand side. So you're trusting that provider to secure that environment for you. In the Azure world, this is how it comes in. It'll come in on the internet, okay? It goes through endpoints. It'll go through the virtual network isolation. It'll go through the actual NSGs and the UDRs. UDRs are user-defined routes, if you have those. And then eventually go to the virtual appliances. Now, one thing that they don't have in there, in the network virtual appliances, is every deployment that you put up in Azure, there's actually a little tiny load balancer that goes in front of anything you put up there. That little load balancer is obviously highly secure, hardened load balancer. But it is considered an attack point, okay? How long will it take someone to actually try and get to that? I don't know. But you have to keep that in the back of your mind, that it is a possibility for an attack point. So, points of interest that I'd like to point out, obviously on the identity side, there's Azure AD, hybrid AD, local users, and of course multi-factor. On the connectivity, internet, tunneling, you can do source IP, site-to-site VPN or ExpressRoute. Obviously, site-to-site VPN and ExpressRoute are going to be the most secure. And then we look at data protection from storage encryption, disk encryption, RBAC, and then just-in-time access. Threat defense, pretty much the same thing that Leo will also be talking about in a little while. And then we go to compliance with auditing policies and compliance services. So this is an actual anatomy of an attack. I'm not going to go through this, but this is how the cyber defense looks at it from Microsoft's perspective, of how an attack actually happens, and then when they actually get down to the incident response part of it. Okay? This is their take on how an attack actually goes through the IaaS chain. So some alternatives you can consider if you're not comfortable with the IaaS. You could go containers. I'm sure some of you know about those. If you don't, I highly recommend you take a look at them. PaaS, of course, then you don't have to worry about a lot of this stuff. SaaS is the same way. Minimal OS, if you haven't looked into Minimal OS, they used to make something from the operating system side called NanoServer. Now it's a container. But that was really a highly secure. You only required 4 patches a year on that baby. That was really nice. Security folks loved NanoServer. But now they've made it a container, so it's more of a container OS. Server core is actually better than data center. You're going to go out and put the full GUI on there because you're comfortable with it. Go with server core if you can. And then serverless. Serverless really, I don't know if you guys have taken any sessions on serverless here while you've been here. Serverless really isn't serverless. It's kind of I don't like the name of it, but it's a bunch of services that are run up in the cloud on different platforms. But it does reduce your attack footprint and your threat footprint. So, NSGs are the core. So again, not going to go through the whole slide because I want to get to some demos, but this is network security groups. They are the core of what will defend your VMs. Okay, this is your first line of defense with the open ports, and then what can get to your machines and what can't. VM just-in-time access, I'm going to show you this, but it's basically inbound port control on an RBAC basis. and it's timed. And I'll show you that. It'll automatically configure the NSGs for you for that time, and you don't even have to do anything. You just basically say, I have a person that wants to get in and use this machine, and I'm going to allow them access for 1 hour, 3 hours, 30 days, whatever. I hope it's not 30 days. I don't think you can go 30 days. But whatever the time limit is, and it'll go through and it'll say, okay, come on in. And then when the time's up, it'll cut them off. This is the SIR, the Microsoft Security Intelligence Report. If you have any interest at all in how Microsoft deals with security, this report is very long, but it's very informative. It really tells you a lot. It talks about how Microsoft identified threats from one time period to another, what the biggest encounters were, all that kind of fun stuff. And it actually outlines some of the changes they did on the security side, so you can be aware of things that you can change in your portal, in your IaaS instances to remediate and mitigate some of the threats that come about. So I'm going to take a deep look at Security Center. I don't know if some of you attended the session on Security Center, but Security Center is awesome. They really put a lot into this, and they keep on improving it. I love it. So I'm going to show you Security Center, but then they've also announced Secure Score, which, if you're familiar with that, that's actually putting a score to your infrastructure or to your policies or to your resource objects, whatever they may be. Azure Firewall. Azure Firewall, obviously, you get to set up your own firewall and do your own thing in there, and your security guys will probably love that. They'll be like, hey, I get to go into the cloud now and be in control of a firewall. Awesome. And then confidential compute. That actually requires a different type of machine. That's a little bit more elaborate, but you can really lock down the application and what it does. So I encourage you to look at that. If that's really what you're looking for, something high security that you want to lock down, confidential compute is pretty cool. And then Microsoft Threat Protection, which they're putting under the umbrella of ATP. That I think they're calling it Azure Threat Protection now. I'm not really sure. It's kind of confusing because they have Microsoft Threat Protection in the documentation, but here at Ignite they called it Azure Threat Protection. Anyways, Advanced Threat Protection, I'm sorry. So Azure Blueprints are another thing. If you haven't heard about blueprints, these are another thing that you really need to do in order to enforce your policy from on-premises up into the cloud. Azure Blueprints allow you to create policies, okay, around objects, resource objects, around RBAC permissions, okay, around subscriptions, all that kind of stuff, and it allows you to think of it as like, group policy on steroids in Azure, okay, to a point. It's really not, because group policy gives you, all kinds of different things you can do on premises. But if you think of that mindset, hey, I'm going to create a blueprint, and that blueprint is going to be used for any deployments or whatever deployments I choose to go up in Azure. It's kind of the same principle. So key takeaways before I get into demos. I don't know if anybody's noticing, the little stormtrooper protecting the house. I had to stick that in there. That's a geek thing. Secure the VMs on creation and through lifecycle. Encrypt them, the VM disks, the storage and data. Control your network traffic with firewalls. Limit your exposure. This is nothing new. You should all know this. Monitor everything and use machine learning solutions, ML. That's besides AI. That's kind of like the big buzz two-letter acronym that everybody's using now. And we'll be talking about Polaris Radar. And then collect data. Collect the security data and archive it based on your retention policies. That is kind of a hit or miss for some folks, because a lot of folks, they're like, hey, no, I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to collect all the data and review it and look at it. Azure, has come up with some really cool ways to actually look at that data, and I'll show you that in these demos. All right. Let's switch over. Good to go? All right. So this is a Azure subscription, obviously, that I'm going to go out and create a virtual machine. Now, for some of you, they've just recently changed this. It used to be a little bit different. Now they've gone to a more of a wizard-based type of machine creation. For those of you who do that, do it programmatically, where you use ARM templates or you deploy via PowerShell or via the REST API or the CLI or what have you. I'm going to use the portal just from a visual point of view, but this also applies to all those different methods that you can create machines, and you can go out and look at machines and things like that if you already do that. So I'm going in and I'm creating a machine. Now, I just want to point out some of the options that are available from a security perspective that you should be aware of. The first one, obviously, is the inbound port rules. If you look at the inbound port rules, all right, right now, none is selected by default. Like I said before, that wasn't true a while ago. All right? If you do actually say allow selected ports, that's where you can go out and you can put in, the RDP, HTTPS, SSH, all that kind of fun stuff. But by default, it's secure, all right, which is cool. Now, if we go to the next, there's really not much you can do here in disk. I stay away from unmanaged disk. If you can stay with managed disk, that's awesome, because then you don't have to worry about them inside of your storage accounts. Microsoft has to worry about them. All right, that's what a managed disk is. It's in Microsoft's land, and they get to take care of it for you. Skipping right ahead to the networking, this is kind of key. When you're dealing with the networking, you're looking at it from a standpoint of what VNets can talk to what. I don't know how complicated your environments are. If you actually have like VNet peering, if you go across regions, if you go across the world, it all depends on what you're doing, right? But you want to make sure it's just like your on-premises network. If you're doing a branch office or you're doing a connection to a company that you're acquired or something like that, you want to be very careful about your networks and how they interconnect and how they talk. I mean, if you talk to anyone who is back in, started out with Cisco, and they're the hardened network admins, they'll be all like, hey, you can only talk to this VLAN, you can only, these machines can only talk to that VLAN, and they can't talk to each other, and so on and so forth. Same thing in the cloud. Public IP. Now, when you create a machine, for whatever reason, Microsoft decides that you want a public IP for that machine. Even if you select no inbound ports, it says, we still think you want a public IP. No. I don't know what you would need it for if you don't have the inbound ports, okay? But if you have a reason, awesome. If not, that's one thing that you're going to have to change, okay? Obviously, you don't want that. That's just adding another exposure, because if you give it a public IP, you know that all of Azure's IP ranges are published, right? So you can go out and you can download an entire spreadsheet of all of Azure's IP ranges. And guess who does that? Hackers. And then they go out and they hit all the machines and they try and find out what ports are open or what IPs are responding. Okay, so you don't want to add yourself, as a potential target. The security groups, if you were to select, advanced here, just make sure that it's a predefined security group, you're putting it in the right spot, things like that. And then again, it asks you the questions about public inbound ports. I don't know why they asked the question twice. But they ask a question twice. If you selected it in the first one, it's obviously selected to none here, right? But for some reason, and I've asked this question of the UI team, of why that's faced twice, and I haven't gotten a good answer yet. And then finally, I'm going to head right over to, this one right here. If my mouse will work, there we go. Identity. Okay, so a lot of you are familiar with managed identity inside of local Active Directory. If you use Active Directory, which I assume most of you do. Managed identity in Azure is kind of the same thing. Think of it as you can use it, manage the identities that can have access to it through Active Directory in Azure, right? So service accounts, things like that. That is the best way to go, obviously more secure than giving, a username of Fred, and a username of Joe, and a username of Jim and Frank, and everything that a person could try and brute force or, put through a cracking system. So that's pretty much it. When you get down to it, you'd go out and create your virtual machine, right? So now I'm going to actually show you a virtual machine that's active. And when you actually create a virtual machine, you have a whole bunch of other things that happen to it, right? You can go in here, you go into the disks of the machines. Obviously, you can enable disk encryption. By default, anything that was done after some date in 2017, sometime, September 2017 or something like that, everything on the storage side on the actual back end is actually encrypted at rest, right? That's automatic. But if you want to actually encrypt the VM disks, okay, that's a little bit different. Now, you have to be careful because some of your processes and applications and things like that don't like encrypted disks. So that's kind of a thing you have to weigh. You have to find out if it's compatible and then whether it's something you really want to do. When you go into security, this is part of Security Center. It's just bringing the information from Security Center into the VM and showing you information just for that VM. I'll get to Security Center. You'll be able to see more once I get to that. The other thing I did want to show you inside of here while we're here is update management. So you want the ability to update those machines. Guess what? If you don't want to update them anymore, you don't want to hassle with having to do the updates, you can actually schedule them. Microsoft will take care of it for you. Right? So that comes up, that creates another, another layer of security that you have to document and you have to, take care of. But you can do that inside of Azure now. I highly recommend if you don't want to do your on-premises the same way that you do the cloud, that you just let Microsoft take care of that for you. Then the other thing I want to note on this is change tracking. This will go through and this will tell you all the changes that happen to a machine. Okay, so you can find out exactly what happened to a machine. Everything from services were changed, started, stopped, all kinds of things that happen. It'll record every change as an event. And this is really critical when you're trying to find out if you've actually been attacked, what the root cause analysis is, how to find, the bad guy, all that kind of stuff. Change tracking is kind of critical for that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hop over to Security Center if you haven't seen that. I think there was a presentation on it, or one or two presentations on it besides a little show in the keynote. Jeremy Winters, I think, did a little bit on it. But this is Security Center, right? Whoops, I didn't mean to click there. This is Security Center. This is going to give you a rundown of your entire environment. It's going to tell you what the recommendations are, what machines that are out of compliance, out of your policy go, okay? Because remember, you can create security policies, you can do blueprints that enforce policies. It'll tell you about attacks that it sees, it has seen, okay, that you may or may not aware of. Excuse me. Let me give you an example. I did a webinar back in August, in the middle of August. And in that webinar, it was a webinar on Azure troubleshooting. And as I was doing the webinar, okay, obviously I'm doing the demo, right? I'm showing it on the screen. And literally, that webinar lasted for an hour. That evening, my machines were under attack, the ones that I had shown in the webinar. It was that fast. There were already people that were trying to do brute force against them, okay? And to this date, that webinar has been recorded and put out on YouTube, and people who watch it, to this date, I'm still getting those machines attacked. And it's because they watch a video, you see the IP address, hey, I'm going to go after this guy's machine and see if I can get into it. It still happens today, and I'll show you. So right here, it says that I've got 3 attack resources. This is live. I didn't make this up. This is not data that I threw out there as sample data or anything like that. So as of yesterday, 9/26, I had 2 attacks on an instance. If I open that up, it'll tell me, guess what? Those are the 2 machines I used in my demo in that webinar. And they're still being attacked. So if I go into that and I take a look at it, it'll actually tell me, yeah, several login attempts, brute force, trying to get into it. Now, if you take this a little bit further, this is a cool part, by the way. Take this a little further, click on this little investigate button. This is really kind of neat. This will actually outline, okay, from a traceability standpoint, where those attacks came from and what they're attacking and how they're attacking it. This is really cool because I can go in there now and I don't require a cyber specialist or a security specialist to help me figure this out. Microsoft has made it dead simple for me to find out who's attacking my stuff. Can I do anything about it? Probably not. Or, you know, I don't have the juice like Microsoft does, right? But I know who the bad guy is. I know where the bad guy is in a general region. But, you know, it really gives me a sense of, yeah, I see you out there, number one. And number two, guess what? I'm going to close this port. I'm going to shut off this IP. I haven't done it yet because I'm still doing demos on it, and I want everybody to see that this is actually still being attacked. So you can actually click here if I wanted to, and that's the bad guy IP. This is the actual authentication attempt, but if you click on the bad guy here, it'll actually try and trace them. Excuse me. And there he is. So it'll actually try and trace it to the region it's in. You know what they call the parent IP is, the ARIN. You know, it'll try and find the ARIN number and all that kind of fun stuff. So this is really cool. Then you can actually do a search. So if you collect enough data on your infrastructure, you can do searches and start to build patterns. Okay, remember the whole buzzword here at Ignite? What's a two-letter acronym that like every session's got this two-letter acronym in it? AI, right? Everything's AI. Well, guess what? All this data can be put into AI. Okay, it is an AI. It's in Azure. It's already being looked at, and then you can see patterns. Hey, maybe you got a really mad person, mad former employee or something that's living over in wherever, and they just keep on banging at you. It could be. Finally, I'm going to show you something that's in Security Center here. When we get down to something I think is really cool. If you go into Compute and Apps, obviously you can go out and you can see what your scores are. When I talked about Secure Score and security scores in general, it'll actually tell you, obviously red is bad, it'll tell you what recommendation it has to try and help you make that environment more secure. You can do that for cloud services. I don't mean to be clicking here, I apologize. I think my knuckle is hitting it. You can do it for cloud services, app services, and then the general overview. You can do it down to networking. It can tell you, hey, maybe you should take a look at this NSG, how it's configured, maybe harden it. They actually have a hardening option that you can pick that I'll go out and it'll tell you what you need to change inside of your NSG. And of course, you have to register for the preview. It's right there. And then I wanted to take a look at security alerts. So again, same screen we saw before, right? But they came up with something called security alert maps. And security alert maps, kind of the same thing. You're looking at a map and a region of what's going on. But when you actually get into it, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can get the whole thing here. But when you actually go to the map itself and go to the workspace where all of your data is kept, you can actually see a little bit more detail on what's going on. I can see that from Brazil, I'm actually getting a botnet attack from Brazil right now, today. Somebody's executing a botnet against one of my AD servers that is kind of like, I created an AD box. I gave it a really obvious name, AD-VM, okay? I got a public IP, I've got an open RDP port. Anybody in here know why I did that? Honeypot, exactly. So I've got a honeypot, and somebody's fallen right into it, which is really cool, because now I'm going to go back to the honeypot and find out what that person's trying to do. But this is really kind of cool, too, because it gives you an overall view. It's not just a single attack. It's an overall view of all of your attacks, or suspected attacks, I should say. And then finally, I'm going to go in to the virtual machines. And if you have never done this, I highly recommend that you take a look at it. I'm sorry. For some reason now I've got a terrible cough and I don't know why. Is it inside the virtual machine? No. Where am I looking here? I was looking for the policy. I'll go into that policy. So if anybody hasn't seen this, this is the actual blueprints. This is where you define your policies. This is where you can actually go in and tell it if I were going to edit this blueprint, it'll actually allow me to add artifacts. It'll allow me to do that based off of policy assignments, roles, or resource groups. If you look at the policy assignments, look at all these that you can do. Isn't that like group policy? It's just like a massive amount of different policies that you can apply. So I highly recommend you do that as well. Take a look at that. Don't necessarily implement it because it is brand new. Of course, you know, Microsoft would probably love you to do that, but you know, there's not one size fits all, and it may not be, you know, what you're really looking for. Okay. So that is my part of the presentation. I am now going to turn it over to Leah, and she will be taking you on a journey of Polaris.
So one thing that I wanted to ask everyone is, how many folks know anything about Rubrik? Have heard about Rubrik even before the show? Before the show. Okay, great. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey to learn a little bit about what Rubrik does. We're really excited to be here. And how's that working?
Yeah, so it was on my slide.
There we go, okay. I'm slide challenged, I apologize. So Rubrik has been spending a lot of time working with Azure and other cloud vendors on cloud data management. And our focus is not so much on the prevention perimeter, which is what Mike has been talking about, but we have more of a focus on making sure that you have early detection and mitigation. Because as a lot of you have told me when I got a chance to talk to you before the session, was that it's not a matter of if you're going to get attacked, it's a matter of when, and what do you do about that. So I just kind of wanted to go through the company's vision and then get into what we're doing to help support security for Azure. Our founders had a vision about 4 years ago. They wanted to be able to simplify data protection. And they wanted to do it in such a way that it was simple, it scaled out. It didn't matter if you scaled out in your data center or if you scaled out in the cloud. They wanted to make sure that it was easy, that it was simple, that you're able to do it from one spot, and that you were able to protect it from an enterprise level. So they wanted to make sure that you had features like end-to-end encryption. They wanted to make sure that those backups were immutable. They wanted to make sure that they used automation to ensure that you could do self-protecting for your infrastructure. And they also wanted to make sure that you could recover your data in minutes and not in hours. Today, we look at the average perimeter that we have today for backup. It looks pretty complex. This kind of architecture started basically in the 90s with the advent of servers. They wanted to make sure that we had enough resources, enough power, enough of the infrastructure to be able to support backing up and protecting your infrastructure. So we had backup proxies, the actual backup server, their search servers, just be able to find certain files that you want, certain data that you want, the actual media that it gets backed up on, and then if you have long-term archive, then it gets shipped off to some place like Iron Mountain. And we've had this for about I'd say about 20 years. It kind of reminds me of the technology transition that we went through before we got something like the smartphone. I don't know how old the average person is here, but I remember seeing a lot of folks sitting at their desk, and they'd have a pager, and they'd have a cell phone, and they'd have a PDA, so that they could make sure they made it to their appointments on time, and they're sitting in front of their computer to do their email. So you had 3 or 4 devices going on here. Things got complex until the smartphone came out, and all of a sudden, all of that collapsed into one. So we have that same quantum leap of technology happening with data protection. Our founders found a way to be able to take all of that and collapse it down into a very simple infrastructure. Simple scale-out infrastructure that supports everything that you have in the cloud, that you have in your data center, and make sure that it's easy to manage. That was one thing that they wanted to do, is they wanted to make it easy, and they wanted to make it easy to deploy. And so this made things a lot different in the industry. And this is something that is a big change in data protection. You know, the last big change we had was from protecting data on the mainframe to protecting data in servers. Now we need to protect that data not only in our servers but in the cloud, and we wanted to make it easy. Another thing that we just announced last week, I think it was on the 12th. Yep. Yeah. So we bought a company earlier this year named Datos.io, and we decided to integrate them with our products. The unique thing about Datos is that they protect your data, NoSQL databases specifically. And this is something big because, especially in the open source community, there really isn't a supported solution to be able to protect your NoSQL databases. And not only protect them on-prem, but also protect them in the cloud. So we have come up with a way to communicate with ABS and support the APIs to be able to do this natively in Azure, or if you want to do it on-prem, or if you'd like to protect it by putting it in the cloud and doing a migration with these backups, you have the choice. And you're able to do this through their control plane. So we're not the data plane or the source of the data or holding the data, but we actually control for management, which is something that's extremely important. We can back up data all day, but if we can't manage it, then that means we can't find what we need. So now I'm going to talk about the second platform that we announced earlier this year, which is Polaris. And the nice thing about Polaris is that it gives you global protection. It is something that looks at all of your instances. You may have companies that have data centers around the world. You may have 10, 15, 20 data centers, and each data center has a Rubrik instance in it. And that's not counting everything that you have in the cloud. So it would be nice to be able to have a command center where you can look and manage everything globally from one location, or be able to manage it from any location. And so that's the nice thing about this. It pulls all the metadata, not the contents of your data, but your metadata into a repository. We call it a unified system of record. A lot of folks call it a data lake. And the neat thing about this is this allows you to build intelligence on top of this. So use machine learning, be able to use artificial intelligence, be able to use data analytics, to be able to make intelligent decisions, and to be able to track things very quickly and easily. The first application that we announced that we put on top of our Polaris platform is GPS. GPS gives you a chance to see where all of your instances are located, and not only be able to see them, but to see what state they're in. You want to know if they're healthy. You want to know if there's attacks going on there. And so it gives you an opportunity to look at the status of what's going on in each of those locations and be able to generate reports that you need, even executive reports that you need in order to give to management. The second application that we just announced last month, which is Radar, we're going to spend more time on that one since this is a security session. We wanted to be able to spend more time on talking about how we support security. Other applications that we have coming out over the next few months will have to do with data governance. It'll be additional artificial intelligence, additional data analytics. You'll also find things around data governance, and we'll also be supporting things like Office 365. We'll also be supporting anything that you want to do around disaster recovery. So those will be coming out very soon. So let's talk a little bit about Polaris. We call this our last line of defense because your security perimeter is already there. You've already spent millions on your security perimeter. And so now you need to look at what happens when there's an attack. And we've looked at a couple of surveys, and we have found that in a couple of these surveys that 70% of companies that were interviewed in a particular survey that we looked at, over 70% of them said that they have been successfully penetrated by ransomware. And that's a lot. That's huge. I have a friend of mine at an analyst firm, ESG. He just finished a report that talks about how he interviewed everyone on his list about ransomware, malware, crypto miners, to find out how they were doing with attacks. And he said 3/4 of them said that they are attacked on a daily basis. So prevention, we're finding, is not quite 100%. So then what happens once you've been penetrated? Once your security perimeter has been penetrated, what happens? Well, then you got to try to bounce back. And trying to bounce back is not easy. First, you have to find out the fact that you have been attacked. And that could take up to a week or more. But once you've found this out, then you have to go through analysis. Then you have to comb through thousands of files to figure out which ones have been affected, which ones not have been affected, and do an analysis on that to figure out how are you going to recover from this attack. You know, are you going to back up files? Are you going to recover directories? Are you going to recover a whole volume? You've got to figure this out. And we have one customer, before they got Radar, they have a pretty good perimeter. They're a systems company. And they found that they had an attack. It took them about a week to find it. But once they found it, they had to go through and find out what had been affected. And that took weeks. And once they figured it out, they realized that they had to go back a whole 30 days to do a full volume recovery. So that means that all the data that was generated in that past 30 days is now gone. So now you're suffering from data loss, not only from productivity. And that costs money. That costs a lot of money. So we decided to introduce Radar. Well, Rubrik's Radar. And the great thing about this is that it helps you recover faster. So instead of spending weeks trying to recover, we want you to be able to recover in minutes or hours. And that's the advantage of this. We use machine learning to be able to have that intelligence to give you that early detection. So we use early detection for anomalies. We look for anomalies on a very frequent basis. Once we have detected it, we have an analysis, very quick instant analysis, that will tell you everything that has been affected so that you can have a quick recovery using our instant recovery on site. And to use this, it's not only just for ransomware, crypto miners, crypto lockers, as Mike mentioned, but also insider threats. You may have a disgruntled employee. You may have just a runaway application. You may have somebody who accidentally deleted a large amount of files. this will detect it and alert. So it comes in handy outside of just understanding negative threats, but also accidents as well. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes just looking under the covers so you can see what happens and how it works. Basically, with detecting anomalies, we use a behavioral-based detection. Most security perimeters use more of a signature-based. And signature-based is great. You know, it does catch most of what's out there, but what they're finding with the increased intelligence is that now they have to make a combination of not only signature-based, but do it in combination with behavioral-based detection. So we're offering that behavioral-based detection, and we work in concert with a security perimeter to be able to give you that last line of defense, that double whammy. And just to let you know what kind of algorithm we're using something very simple, something that's well known. It's called KNN. It's a K nearest neighbor algorithm. And the nice thing that we like about this algorithm is that it's one of the most used learning algorithms. And the reason why it is that way is because you don't need to have a lot of history behind the distribution and behavior of your data in order for it to start being effective. There's a lot of algorithms out there where it's going to take 3 months, 6 months, 8 months for it to actually learn a behavior before it becomes effective. This becomes effective within a couple of weeks. And it's what most folks in machine learning call a lazy algorithm. And it's not lazy as we would consider lazy in the common term. What it means is that it can work right away with no prior knowledge of the distribution. So when we have it installed, we have a baseline that's pretty common for most distributions, but right away it starts learning the behavior of your data and is able to pick up right away and be effective in protecting. And just to go over the architecture really quickly, make things very easy for you. First, a snapshot is taken, and then it's indexed. And then we do a diff between the current snapshot and the snapshot before. And then that diff is sent up to Polaris. So just to be clear, none of your data content, your actual data, goes up to the cloud. Just the metadata, just the results of what we've done. And this is for your protection. Once that happens, I'll give you an example. Let's say someone does 24-hour snapshots. They have a snapshot every 24 hours. We have SLAs. You can set it up for every 5 minutes, every hour, once a day, once a week. It's up to you. So based on the SLA, someone is taking a snapshot at 11 p.m. on Monday. With 24 hours, the way they have it set up, does it the same thing again on Tuesday. There's a diff that happens. There's not much difference. It's pretty normal activity. But then on Wednesday, you notice 2,000 files are added, over 2,000 files are removed. We have lots of modifications going on in files. This sends up a red flag. And so when that happens, then there's an alert that immediately goes out to the user in the form of an email. And also, Radar starts right away looking and examining that snapshot for encryption. And once it's done that, then it takes the results and sends it to the Polaris UI. And it's just a matter of seconds or a couple of minutes that the results come up. It goes through thousands of files if necessary to give you this information. So once the results are up in the UI, you get the opportunity to see everything right away. You get to see what's affected, what's not infected. How do you want to recover? Do you want to recover files, directories, full volumes? It's up to you. You just choose what you want, and within a few clicks, you're able to do your recovery. That information goes straight to the Rubrik instance, right away, instant recovery. is triggered and your data is restored right away. So this really cuts down from the things that we've been doing in days and weeks and really brings it down to minutes and hours. So that saves you downtime, and it also saves a lot of money. I don't know if you guys have been reading the news or keeping up on what's been happening this year, but over 300 universities have successfully been attacked. We've seen a lot of major corporations, they've spent millions of dollars just trying to recover from attacks. So this is something that can be very cost effective. The nice thing about having Rubrik is that we do make your backups immutable and we do give you fast recovery. But when you get a chance to use Radar to add to your security, then you're able to get early detection, you're able to get quick analysis, and you're able to recover in a few minutes just with a few clicks. And we've had plenty of success with our customers. Our buddies down under in Australia, they've been able to recover. They had an attack, they recovered in less than an hour with 0 data loss. And these are just some of the other companies that we've had that have had significant savings in time, in money, in productivity. And being able to have that easy mobility in the cloud. So with Azure, with any other public cloud that they work with, they have that easy mobility. So now we're going to open it up for questions. And if you get a chance, please visit our booth. We have a nice demo out there. We don't have time for a demo today on Radar, but we do have that in the booth. So please stop by and see us. And I'm going to see if Mike wants to open it up for questions.
Sure. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? Yes, sir.
Do we actually get root cause analysis on this? So you mentioned a crypto lock event right there, right?
Right.
Do we actually see any root cause analysis, what file it was that was uploaded that was the malware itself?
You're going to see that as, yeah, because it's collecting if you have a file that's uploaded, obviously, is brought into the environment, we're looking at the data that you're actually actively using every day. So if it's a new entry, then yes, we will track it once Polaris actually sees it, okay? But if it's brought in and then the attack happens, we don't see it until we're actually, it's brought into the environment. But yes, we'll see it. Whatever metadata is associated with that file, like open, close, things like that, yes.
What remedy steps are available through the interface?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Did you hear that?
What remediation steps are available through the interface? Once you find an attack, what remediation steps are available?
Oh, yeah. So what it does is that it'll show you from file level exactly what was affected. And then you can recover right away.
Right. So from the Rubrik standpoint, then you just go back in time, and you can go back to whatever number of backups that you have. You can we have actually a really dynamic search engine, so you can just search for that particular file, and it'll list out all the different versions that you have.
Yeah.
Are there any plans to include other API calls, like power off the virtual machine, remove the NIC, et cetera?
In the future, that's something that we're looking at as part of that. We also are looking at supporting APIs for major security products so that those alerts can also go into your security perimeter management system.
Right. We're already looking at other vendors. We integrate with ServiceNow now, but then there are actually some SIEM products that we're going to be integrating with.
Excellent. The last question is, you guys can plug your logs into Splunk?
I think that's also something that's
It is. It's on the roadmap.
Yep.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Right now, we've started out with one cloud vendor, but the answer will be yes very soon. So it's something that's new and that we just started, this year, and we're already looking at rolling it out with the rest of all the cloud vendors. But it's cloud agnostic, as in if you want to protect something that is, let's say, in AWS or Google, but you actually have your repository in Azure, you can still, cloud agnostic that way, yes, it is still looked upon, it's still protected, it's still taken care of.
It doesn't care. It doesn't care about the cloud.
Where you
really.
have it.
Yeah.
You can have it in any cloud.
Any other questions? Anybody? Somebody want a T-shirt or two? And look at the hands go up right away. Figured.
How many did you bring?
I only brought a couple, but
know what?
we got to ask a question. That's the thing. They have to answer the right question.
Okay.
All right. So real quickly, I'm just going to ask a couple questions about what I talked about a little bit. Okay. Can anybody tell me what this solution is that allows for you to set an RBAC control and a time limit on access to a machine? Who said it first? You got to raise your hand. I don't know. You said it first? You said it first.
I guess, yeah. I didn't know if it was raise my hand, he was shouting.
Yeah, you got to, yeah. So what'd you say? Just in time. You got yourself one of these cool Rubik shirts. Do you have a question? You got to ask a question about something you talked about.
I didn't know you were bringing the shirt, so you got the questions.
Ask them a question about radar.
Ask them a question about radar.
Yeah. What is the algorithm we use in radar?
Very good.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you very much.
What size, sir? Medium. Let me see. This is a large. I'll get you a medium. And we are almost out of time. Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming. If you have any questions, booth 1500 down on the floor.
Yeah.
And
Please
thanks.
get your radar demo, and there's socks down there. So, yes, please
see what I
get
got
your
here.
socks.